Rethink Your Wealth is brought to you by UOB. UOB, right by you.
You're listening to Money FM 89.3. I'm Ryan Huang. With the 2024 US presidential election poised to shake global markets, the outcome will have far-reaching implications. Whoever occupies the White House next will significantly influence US-ASEAN economic relations, and Southeast Asian policymakers will need to respond strategically. But which result, Trump or Harris, would be more beneficial for Singapore and the region? To explore these questions, we welcome Abel Lim, Head of Wealth Management Advisory and Strategy at UOB, who has worked in the bank for 16 years, and he currently oversees the bank's wealth advisory content for its clients. Abel, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, Ryan, and thank you very much for having me.
Well, lots to unpack. With potential policy shifts ahead, what key steps should Singapore and ASEAN take to prepare for possible economic disruptions in trade and investment in the US?
Well, Ryan, for one, it's a little bit too early for us to predict the outcome. Clearly the polls can swing quite drastically as we run up towards the election day. So again, we think there's a little bit too early to call for either a red or even a blue sweep. And there will be differences between who occupies the presidency and also the Congress. So the outcome of these two will have meaningful and material impact on where markets and how markets will react. Importantly, I think it's also very important for investors to understand that what the candidate says, what the candidate can do when he occupies the office, and what the candidate actually does in the future when he occupies the office or she occupies the office will vastly differ. And as such, it's quite hard for us to predict any potential outcome. However, there will be volatilities. And these volatilities is what investors should be thinking about globally, not just in Singapore, but in the broader ASEAN. But it's also important for us to think about, the enhancing cooperation, because this highlights the need for countries, for companies to come together a lot closer, to come together with a lot more policies that allows freer trade, freer flow of information, freer economic policies and outcomes. Importantly, it's also good for countries to consider decreasing the dependency on a pure US market, which unfortunately a lot of countries are. Similarly, thinking about rejoining or reconnecting supply chains, because there will be disruptions, particularly in a Trump's presidency era, where there will be outcomes where may be less favorable for countries, particularly on the supply side. So thinking about reconnecting supply chain will indefinitely decrease their dependency on a pure US engagement.
Yeah, Abel, definitely a lot to think about in terms of how this could play out. So if Donald Trump were to secure a second presidency, how might his previous economic policies, particularly regarding trade and tariffs, impact Singapore's economy and its investment relationships in the region?
So the good news is we have seen Trump 1.0. Trump 1.0 obviously had a more protectionistic stance. He was a lot more keen in making America great again, which meant that there was a lot of nearshoring and onshoring of key industries, which meant that a lot of these policies had to impact a lot of other countries, bringing back jobs towards America. Now, we don't expect very much different in Trump 2.0. We think that he's likely to continue with his approach. In fact, he has already touted that he's likely to impose tariffs across a larger audience, not just towards China, which again was one of his main proponents in the trade economy. But this time around, he's also proposing tariffs for products that are not directly from China. So again, that is likely to have a material impact across most of this economy. And hence, it's important for us to think about a China plus one strategy, right? Because the fact that a lot of these companies, a lot of these countries are likely to see a flow of foreign direct investments from American firms into their respective countries. So take Indonesia, take Malaysia, Singapore, for example, you're likely to see more direct investments into our country and in the respective countries because we need to diversify that supply chain risk away from a pure China supply chain.
Yeah, supply chain risk definitely on the watch if we see Donald Trump come into the frame. So how might a Kamala Harris presidency create new opportunities for Singapore and ASEAN in terms of economic collaboration?
So we view Kamala presidency to be slightly less aggressive. In other words, we don't expect major dramas, nor do we expect major shifts from President Biden's current policies, the current President Biden's administration. So we don't think that the impact on the global economy is going to be as great as a shift in terms of President Trump's move. We think that she is likely to continue with President Biden's push towards climate change, green energy, which means that this clean energy space, the green energy space, EVs, for example, will continue to do very well if in the markets going forward. So the current winners that we see in the markets today, the companies that engages in a lot of the green energy space are likely to enjoy support in that space as we go forward. But of course, we also will see that the technological companies are likely to face a little bit of headwind. Why? Because Vice President Harris is likely to hike corporate tax, bringing it from 21% to 28%, which it was originally. And this will eat into corporate profits, right? And ultimately, that will hurt share prices. So in that space, companies, the larger companies that has enjoyed those tax cuts, particularly in the financial space, in the tech space, these are likely to feel the pinch if she comes into office.
Yeah, definitely in different ways how this will play out depending on who comes to power. So both Trump and Harris have taken strong but distinct stances on China. How could the election result influence Singapore's and ASEAN's economic relationship with both the US and China, given the ongoing rivalry between these superpowers?
That's a really good question. And this will be a multi-year question. In fact, the challenge for supremacy in many spaces between the United States and China will continue. We expect this to be multi-generational for them to be able to dominate a particular space, particularly in the tech space. So for lack of a better word, this volatility, this challenge will continually exist, regardless of who becomes the president in the upcoming election. In fact, this is the only thing they agree upon bipartisanly, which may to take on the Chinese and the maybe preventing them from becoming the next superpower to challenge the United States. So for Singapore in particular, or ASEAN in particular, I think it's right to say that we have adopted a politically neutral stance with regards to taking sides. So being forced to take sides is something maybe somewhere down in the future, but at this current juncture, we prefer not to show an upward preference for either or. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when elephant fights, right, grass get trampled. That's inevitable. The good news about trampled grass is that green shoots of opportunities will rise. And these are the green shoots of opportunities that investors should be thinking about. For example, when United States and China fought on the technological space, we saw that quite a fair bit of technological companies started to reconsider shifting their headquarters away from China into ASEAN countries. Those are the companies that you might want to participate in, not just in the name, but the entire ecosystem that actually builds around a particular brand, a particular industry. That is where the opportunity arises. So those are the green shoots of opportunities that investors in the long run will be able to participate and benefit.
That's right. We saw the ASEAN, or rather the China Plus One opportunity for ASEAN. So talking about sectors and opportunities, let's talk about what's happening for Singapore and ASEAN. Which do you think are going to be the sectors to watch out for in terms of the most affected by the different approaches from Donald Trump and Kamala Harris?
So I did allude to some of that just now. Now let's talk about President Trump first. I think his stance is a lot more towards the fossil fuel industry. In other words, the oil and gas industry is likely to benefit from its policies. And Singapore will, of course, be one of the beneficiaries in that space. And having said that, manufacturing will also be an industry that we want to pay attention to, considering the fact that a lot of this industry might be considering Singapore as a potential destination. Well, ultimately, we have pretty good infrastructure, we have a skilled workforce, and also we're pretty well connected to the world. Singapore is one of the most open economy to the world right now. So obviously, we have very attractive options for companies thinking to relocate. And it's the same for a lot of our ASEAN neighbors. A lot of these countries also offer similar benefits that could benefit certain industries. So obviously, the manufacturing, the oil and gas sector in the Trump's presidency would prevail. Now, speaking of Ms. Harris, I think one of the key areas that we think will continue to flourish or do well is what is happening right now, the high-tech sector. You know, we saw the Magnificent Seven doing very well the last couple of years, although in recent months we have seen a little bit of faltering. But I think they will be continually supported, given the fact that, current Vice President Harris is likely to impose a lot or allow more favorable policy outcomes that supports industries in the technological space. And this is also true for the healthcare because, she is a lot more supportive as opposed to President Trump, who is likely to come in to cut some of these subsidies. So again, a lot of these industries are highly dependent. Too early to call. We do not know who's going to be the next president, 47th president of the United States. But at this current juncture, we think that the likely outcome is as such.
Yeah, interesting to see how this could play out for different sectors. Right, in your view, Abel, which index policies would likely be more conducive for Singaporean and ASEAN investors?
Okay, that again is a question that is incredibly hard to answer and more. A question which we think investors should not be focusing wholly on. Because if you think about investing, it's not about whom is the next president. Of course, that will have material and short-term volatility impact on the markets. But I think as an investor, you should be thinking about the true fundamentals of the market, valuations, earning potentials, possibility to expand and grow in different markets. These are the real questions investors should be focusing on and zooming on when it comes to an investment thesis. True, presidential election or the new presidency will have impact on the markets, particularly when it comes to trade and foreign policies. But ultimately, when the dust settles, you really need to consider the fundamentals of the industry, the market, and the company that your BFO has been looking into.
I suppose near-term volatility, but it's back to fundamentals every day. We've been in conversation with Abel Lim, who is the Head of Wealth Management Advisory and Strategy at UOB, help us to unpack the potential implications of the US elections for Singapore and ASEAN. Abel, thanks for your time today.
Pleasure so mine.
Money FM 89.